The laughter around the dinner table always carried the same tone, warm on the surface, sharp underneath. I'd learned to measure my words carefully, to stir my soup quietly, to smile when it was my turn to be invisible. Tonight was no different. My father was in one of his storytelling moods, the kind where he spoke loud enough for the neighbors to hear about how proud he was of his successful daughter. Of course he meant my sister. He leaned back in his chair, his voice booming. You know, I always said hard work pays off. Look at her. New house, her own company, a BMW, all earned by grit. No shortcuts. My mother nodded approvingly, eyes bright with pride. My sister, sitting beside him, tilted her head modestly, pretending she didn't love the attention. I tried to join in, to mention something about her company's new branding campaign. Something I'd helped design once. Late into the night, for free. But before I could finish, my father interrupted. Well, you wouldn't understand the business side, honey. You've never really had to struggle like she has. The words hit with the same sting they always did. The table erupted in gentle laughter. Nothing cruel. Just the kind of laughter that said, we all agree. I forced a small smile, pretending it didn't matter. My fork scraped against the plate. He poured himself another glass of wine, still smiling. Your sister earned everything on her own, unlike you. There it was. The punchline. My sister tried to hush him with a playful, Dad, stop, but she didn't mean it. My mother looked at me and sighed, as if embarrassed on my behalf. I wanted to speak, to remind them that I'd helped her set up that business, that I'd designed her first logo, stayed up nights handling her emails while she slept. But my throat tightened. What would be the point? They'd already decided who I was. I picked up my food and tried to swallow the ache. Memories blurred at the edge of my thoughts. Late nights spent working quietly in my small apartment, transferring money I didn't have so she could meet her supplier deadlines, watching her accept awards while I clapped from the crowd. Every time, my father's words echoed the same refrain. You could learn something from your sister. The conversation at the table moved on without me. They talked about her new project, her investors, her housewarming party. My name never came up again. I looked at my sister's manicured, hands resting lightly on the table, and remembered the call I'd gotten months ago, her frantic voice, asking if I could lend her a little cash to cover construction overruns on her dream home. I'd wired it the same day. The irony settled, like a stone in my stomach. I took a deep breath and looked around the table. My father was laughing again, leaning closer to my sister as if she were the sun around which we all orbited. I felt small but not broken. There was something about humiliation that clarifies things. It strips away the illusion that love can be earned by staying silent. For years, I'd told myself they just didn't see me. But that night, I realized they chose not to. My sister glanced at me briefly, maybe sensing something in my expression. You okay? She asked softly, too softly for the others to hear. I smiled. Yeah, I'm fine. But I wasn't. I could feel something shifting quietly inside me, like the first crack in a dam. As they went on laughing and reminiscing about her success, I stared at the tablecloth, tracing the pattern absently with my finger. Every thread seemed woven with the same history of comparison, every design a reminder of how perfectly I'd learned to disappear. That night, as dessert was served and the laughter grew louder, I sat still and watched them. I saw my father beam with pride. I saw my sister bask in the glow of his approval. And I finally saw myself clearly, someone who'd given more than anyone realized, and received nothing but dismissal in return. When my father raised his glass to toast her, his words echoed like a verdict. To my daughter, who earned everything she has. My smile didn't waver. My voice didn't tremble. I clinked my glass gently against theirs. Inside, though, something fierce began to wake. He didn't know I paid for the first brick of that house. Growing up in our house was like living under two different suns. One shone bright, dazzling, impossible to look away from. That was my sister. The other was dim, steady, often unnoticed. That was me. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. 2 daughters, a father who worked hard, and a mother who kept the home immaculate. But perfection has shadows, and mine stretched long behind my sister's light. She was the golden child, even as a toddler. Loud, fearless, charming, she knew how to win attention without asking for it. When relatives visited, she'd recite poems, sing songs, and dance in the living room while everyone clapped. I'd be the one holding her shoes, smiling quietly, watching her glow. "You should be more like your sister," my father would say, half joking, half serious. I heard it so many times that it became less of a suggestion and more of a sentence. In school, she was popular, effortlessly adored. Teachers loved her confidence. Friends followed her everywhere. I wasn't shy, just quieter, slower to speak, more observant. But in our home, silence was mistaken for weakness. My achievements were invisible because they didn't sparkle. When I got the highest grade in my class, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. When my sister won a small local dance trophy, he threw a party. It was always like that. Her victories filled the air. My efforts filled the gaps. When our father's business hit a rough patch during my high school years, things got tense. The laughter at dinner turned brittle. The lights dimmed earlier to save electricity. My mother whispered about overdue bills, and I overheard arguments behind closed doors. I was 16 then, old enough to understand what pride wouldn't let them say out loud. We were struggling, so I found a job. After school, I worked at a small cafe downtown, wiping tables and serving coffee until closing. I told my parents it was for experience, but the truth was, I slipped half my pay into an envelope on my father's desk every week. He never asked where it came from. He just accepted it. And then, one evening, I overheard him telling a family friend, "We're lucky our older daughter's so responsible. She's helping us through the tough times." He meant my sister. I remember standing outside his office, the envelope still in my hand, my breath caught in my chest. I didn't correct him. I never did. That became a pattern. My contributions always found their way to her name. When the electricity bill was mysteriously paid, it was because she must have handled it. When groceries appeared in the kitchen after I'd worked overtime to buy them, my mother would smile at her and say, "You're such a blessing." My sister would just shrug, pretending she didn't know what they meant. Maybe she didn't, or maybe she liked being believed in that much. But the neglect wasn't just about money. It was emotional, subtle, consistent. On my 16th birthday, they forgot. My father was away on business. My mother was busy helping my sister prepare for a competition. I made myself a cupcake that night and lit a single candle. I remember the flicker of it against the kitchen tiles, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the sound of their laughter upstairs. On her next birthday, there were balloons, a banner, a cake taller than my textbooks. I clapped along and handed her the gift I'd bought with my cafe tips. She didn't notice the tear in the wrapping paper or the exhaustion in my eyes. Still, I kept trying. I told myself it wasn't their fault. Maybe I wasn't easy to love. Maybe my quietness made me forgettable. That's what years of comparison do. They turn you against yourself before you ever think to question anyone else. By the time we reached college, my sister's life sparkled online. Filtered photos, smiling selfies, celebrations with friends. Mine was quieter, focused on survival. I studied hard, took night classes, and worked part-time jobs. Sometimes I'd see her post about the struggles of building her dreams, and my parents would gush about how proud they were. I'd be sitting at my desk, editing her resume or fixing her presentations, knowing they'd never know my name was on the drafts. The resentment grew slowly, like rust under paint. It wasn't hatred, not yet. It was just fatigue, the kind that comes from being unseen for too long. There were moments, brief ones, when I thought maybe things could change. Like the day I won a scholarship. I remember coming home, heart racing, holding the letter like it was gold. I showed my parents, waiting for their faces to light up. My mother smiled absently, said, "That's nice, dear," and then turned to remind my sister about her upcoming event. That was the night I stopped expecting applause. From then on, I measured love not by words, but by absence. The absence of criticism, the absence of disappointment. My sister shone brighter every year, and I learned to dim myself just to survive in her glow. But there's one thing they all forgot about shadows. They don't disappear. They wait, quietly, patiently, and eventually they learn how to move on their own. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where I could finally carve out my own path. But the reality was harsh. My father refused to help pay for my tuition, claiming I should figure things out on my own, while every letter from my sister arrived in a glossy envelope, paid in full, with scholarship assistance and parental pride attached. He called her the eldest and most responsible, as if that automatically erased my existence. I quickly learned to navigate this world alone. I took a night job tutoring high school students in math and science, grading papers while my dorm mates went out to parties or slept late. On weekends, I freelanced, designing small logos and writing content for local businesses, every dollar carefully saved to cover tuition, rent, and food. My back ached constantly from late nights hunched over my laptop, my eyes dry from staring at textbooks. There was no time to complain. There was no audience to witness my effort. Meanwhile, my sister launched her first business, a small boutique branding firm, she claimed, inspired by her vision and creativity. The reality was that I spent countless nights working with her behind the scenes. I designed her logo, created marketing materials, wrote pitch emails, and helped her set up the financial spreadsheets that kept her operations afloat. I never asked for recognition. In my mind, helping family was simply what one did. Yet the world, and my parents, saw only her. Every client meeting she attended, every investor she dazzled, was attributed to her innate talent. I stayed home, correcting invoices or responding to frantic emails while she posed for photos with potential investors, her hair perfect, her smile effortless. My presence was invisible, yet indispensable. I remember the day my father hosted a dinner for family friends. He couldn't stop bragging. "My eldest daughter is doing so well. She's responsible, talented, and making this family proud," he said, beaming as he sipped his wine. My sister smiled modestly, accepting every compliment. I stood in the corner, slicing the roast quietly, the knife pressing into my palm harder than necessary. I could have reminded him of the countless hours I spent editing her pitch deck, of the nights I stayed up calculating budgets so her plans would look flawless. But what would be the point? He had already made up his mind about me. It wasn't resentment yet. It was exhaustion and quiet determination. I learned to smile, nod, and let them believe the story they wanted. I was the lazy one, the background, the girl who didn't try hard enough, while my work formed the invisible scaffolding that held her dreams together. I recall one late night in the tiny apartment I rented near campus. I sat on the floor, surrounded by invoices, notes, and sketches for her campaign. My stomach growled, a reminder I'd skipped dinner to finish an urgent email, but I forced myself to breathe through the fatigue, to remind myself why I was doing this. One day, I thought, one day they would see me. One day, the work I poured into her success wouldn't be invisible. Until then, I stayed in the shadows. I logged hours no one counted, solved problems no one credited, and carried burdens no one noticed. And yet, even as I felt the weight pressing down, I couldn't deny a small, stubborn pride. I was building something too. Quietly, painfully, authentically. Something that would one day belong entirely to me. By the time graduation rolled around, my sister was lauded as the self-made success of the family. My father's words repeated themselves at every gathering. My eldest daughter is an example of responsibility and talent. And still, no one knew the truth. My hands had touched every detail of that business. My nights had built every foundation she stood upon, and my heart had silently endured every slight. He thought she earned it all on her own. He didn't know the sacrifice I had made to make her shine. The years passed, and my sister's company blossomed into something impressive. Investors raved, employees admired her leadership, and my father proudly bragged about her accomplishments at every dinner and gathering. I had watched it all from the sidelines, silently fixing problems she didn't see, filling gaps she never acknowledged, and staying awake nights to ensure every presentation, every report, every pitch was flawless. Yet, despite my contributions, I remained invisible, the lazy one, the girl who never had the drive. Then came the day that shattered what little patience I had left. A disagreement erupted over a major client deal. I voiced a concern about logistics and deadlines, something I knew from years of managing behind the scenes, but my sister dismissed me with a laugh. The conversation escalated, tension thickening the air in our small home office. When I persisted, appealing to fairness and practicality, my father walked in. I looked to him for support, expecting him to see the effort I'd put in, the countless hours no one ever acknowledged. Instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, voice calm but cutting. "Stop being jealous. Not everyone's cut out for success." His words landed like blows, not just on my pride, but on my heart. I opened my mouth to argue, to remind him of all the nights I'd worked while she took the credit, but the words faltered in my throat. They wouldn't hear me. They had already decided. Humiliation surged through me, hot and relentless. I felt every missed birthday, every dismissed achievement, every smile my parents reserved for her. I realized then that I was not just unseen. I was expendable, a background figure meant to prop up her story while mine was erased. Anger and despair tangled together, creating a weight that pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I packed a small bag that night, leaving behind the family home I'd grown up in, but never truly belonged to. Each step out the door felt like shedding a skin I had worn for decades. The obedient, quiet daughter, the invisible helper, the scapegoat who took blame silently. I didn't look back. The faint glow of the house behind me held no warmth, only shadows of what had never been mine. Loneliness wrapped around me like a second skin, familiar and suffocating. Yet within it, a strange clarity emerged. I understood now that their neglect, their favoritism, their blind pride in my sister's self-made success had no power over me unless I allowed it. I was leaving more than home. I was leaving the weight of their judgments, the chains of their comparisons, the unspoken rules that had kept me small. As I walked into the cool night, the city lights stretching ahead like a promise, I felt the sting of heartbreak, but also the spark of something new, a determination to build a life where my efforts would matter, where my voice could be heard, where I could finally be recognized on my own terms. The breaking point wasn't just an ending. It was the first step toward reclaiming everything they had denied me. After leaving home, I didn't rush into confrontation or seek validation from anyone. For the first time in years, I let silence be my shield. It was strange at first. The quiet felt heavy, almost accusatory, as if the world was waiting for me to beg for recognition. But gradually I realized silence could be more powerful than any argument, more precise than any outburst. Every word I didn't waste on excuses, every explanation I forgave myself for skipping, became energy I could pour into something that was truly mine. I threw myself into my design projects with a ferocity I hadn't known I possessed. Nights that had once been consumed by frustration now became incubators for creativity. I experimented with new branding concepts, crafted sleek logos, and wrote copy that spoke with honesty and precision. Every client I took on, every pitch I sent, carried a piece of me. Careful, considered, deliberate. My startup grew slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but it grew with integrity, each small success quietly accumulating. I learned to value the little victories, landing a small client, receiving a thoughtful compliment on a design, watching a website I built go live. These moments no one else would notice became my sustenance. I began to see that recognition didn't have to come from them. It could come from the work itself, from the quiet satisfaction of seeing something take shape under my hands. Months passed, and the startup started gaining traction. A major investor, known for scouting talent with a keen eye, reached out. He praised my creativity and humility, noting the clarity and emotional resonance in my designs. He saw what no one at home had seen: dedication, intelligence, and an unacknowledged brilliance. The first time I signed a contract with him, I felt a thrill that was both quiet and overwhelming. The knowledge that my efforts were finally valued on their own merit. In those moments of reflection, I began to understand the true power of silence. It was not weakness, it was strategy. It allowed me to observe, to build, to move forward without interference. While my family continued celebrating superficial achievements, I had crafted something real, durable, and entirely mine. The irony was not lost on me. The same hands that had once been overlooked now held the tools of my independence. The same mind that had been dismissed had guided every design choice and every strategic decision. I was no longer competing for attention. I was earning influence quietly, steadily, and without spectacle. I began to imagine the future differently. Success would not come as a scream demanding validation. It would arrive as a quiet revelation, undeniable and inescapable. My silence was not absence, and it was preparation. Every ignored effort, every slight I endured, had sharpened me, honed me, and taught me patience. I had transformed my invisibility into a weapon, one that would strike precisely and without warning when the time was right. For the first time, I felt the balance shift, not through confrontation or pleading, but through deliberate, silent action. I was building a life where recognition would come not from their eyes, but from the world's, and from my own. And in that quiet, reflective space, I discovered a satisfaction far deeper than any applause my family had ever offered. Weeks after securing a steady flow of clients, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. A luxury retail company, one my sister had been obsessively talking about for months, was looking for a creative partner for their upcoming campaign. They wanted innovation, authenticity, and someone who could bring fresh ideas without the usual corporate noise. My heart skipped, not because of excitement alone, but because I knew this was the very company my sister had been pitching tirelessly at every dinner, every call, every networking event. I reviewed their proposal carefully. This was not a casual opportunity. The project was high profile, public, and capable of launching any firm into international recognition. I knew I could handle it, not just because of my skills, but because of the years of silent preparation, the sleepless nights spent perfecting strategies, the countless hours of trial and error I had endured on my own. I submitted a detailed, creative pitch under my company's name, leaving my personal identity entirely out of the equation. No one from the brand needed to know the history, the family drama, the sacrifices that had led me here. Days later, a reply came. They wanted to meet. Their language was formal, polite, but the excitement beneath it was unmistakable. The meeting went smoothly. I presented concepts with precision and passion, demonstrating a clear understanding of their brand and target audience. I answered questions thoughtfully, suggesting ideas that highlighted both creativity and practical implementation. By the end of the presentation, they shook my hand, smiling, saying they were impressed by my vision and clarity. I walked out without any fanfare, knowing the outcome already. A few evenings later, I sat quietly at dinner with my family. My sister, ever the performative one, bubbled with excitement, practically bouncing in her seat. "I think I'm really close to sealing the biggest contract of my career," she said, her eyes sparkling. My father leaned forward, proud and eager. "I knew all those late nights would pay off, sweetheart. You're unstoppable." I smiled softly, keeping my expression calm. No one needed to know that the deal she was so desperate for had already been awarded. Not to her, but to me. I allowed her the illusion of progress, letting the conversation carry her excitement while I quietly savored my victory. Years of unseen labor, every bit of effort I'd poured into my own growth, had culminated in this moment of understated triumph. The subtle satisfaction coursed through me. While my sister had been shouting, negotiating, and performing for approval, I had been building something real, grounded, meaningful, and ultimately irresistible to those who truly understood value. The difference between us was stark. She sought validation from others while I had silently earned it. Later, when my father glanced at me with that casual, habitual glance that implied disappointment, I realized something remarkable. I didn't need him to see me. I didn't need anyone in that room to understand the depth of my work or the long nights that had led to this point. The brand had recognized merit where it mattered, and that alone was more satisfying than 1,000 dinners or empty compliments. I sipped my water slowly, letting the quiet weight of the moment settle over me. My sister continued to chatter, unaware that her prized contract had already slipped from her reach. Pride, ambition, and eagerness danced in her eyes, oblivious to the silent truth across the table. I had become the unseen hand shaping the very success she claimed as her own, and for the first time, invisibility felt like power. That night, As the conversation drifted toward other trivial family matters, I allowed myself a private smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The world had already acknowledged what my family refused to see. Every sacrifice, every silent hour, every overlooked contribution had finally been vindicated in a quiet, unstoppable way. For the first time, I understood that patience could be far more dangerous than confrontation. My silence had become my weapon, my shield, and my advantage. While my sister raced toward recognition, I had already arrived, unnoticed but unstoppable, and it felt intoxicating. The night of the corporate gala was electric. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, golden accents, and the buzz of executives, investors, and influencers mingling with drinks in hand. Everyone was dressed to impress, laughter floating across the air like music, and I felt the familiar flutter of nerves in my stomach. But this wasn't about anxiety. It was about control. The kind of power I'd quietly earned over years of unseen work. Tonight, the spotlight would tell the truth in a way no words at dinner could. I walked in wearing a simple, elegant black dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing to scream for attention. Just me, poised, calm, prepared. My sister was already there, chatting animatedly with the event coordinators, her eyes scanning the room for recognition, for approval, for applause. She didn't know that the person behind the brand she had been desperately pitching for months, the one whose influence would decide the contract's fate, was standing a few feet away. The host stepped onto the stage, raising his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we celebrate a new partnership that will redefine luxury branding. It's my pleasure to introduce the creative director responsible for this groundbreaking collaboration." My pulse quickened, but my face remained serene. The audience leaned forward, anticipation crackling like electricity in the air, and then the spotlight swung in my direction. I stepped onto the stage, each footfall measured, deliberate. Gasps rippled across the room, a collective intake of breath that sent shivers down my spine. Conversations froze mid-sentence, eyes widening as recognition dawned. I could see whispers travel across tables, murmurs of shock, disbelief, admiration. My sister's mouth fell open slightly, a flicker of panic crossing her perfect composure. She scanned the stage, finally landing on me. For a moment, everything froze. Time stretched. My father, seated at a corner table, leaned forward, his jaw dropping. His eyes darted between me and my sister, confusion, pride, and disbelief warring across his face. I could almost see the calculations racing in his mind, the realization of what he had ignored for years settling in like a heavy stone. I smiled gently, acknowledging the applause with a nod. There was no gloating, no need to announce who I was or why I was there. The spotlight, the audience, the contract, and the very air of success spoke for itself. Every invisible hour, every silent sacrifice, every overlooked contribution had led me here, and now, for the first time, the truth was impossible to ignore. My sister's cheeks flushed, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. She opened her mouth, probably to claim some credit, but the host continued, presenting our shared achievements, listing my contributions, my strategy, my designs. There was no room for denial. My presence was undeniable, and the room's energy confirmed it. I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest, deeper than any applause my family had ever given me. This was validation earned without argument, without begging for recognition, without pleading. It was unassailable, public, and permanent. The very company my sister had been racing to impress had chosen me. She had unknowingly lost, before she even realized the game had started. As the evening continued, the whispers grew into conversations about innovation, talent, and unexpected brilliance. I returned to my table, calm, collected, letting the realization of my victory sink in. My father remained frozen in his seat, eyes lingering on me, his pride and shock mingling in a way I'd never witnessed. For once, I didn't need his words or approval. The room had already spoken. That night, I learned something profound. Triumph doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, confidently, letting the world's recognition do the talking. And as my sister avoided eye contact, fumbling for words that would never undo the truth, I understood that years of invisible work, silent perseverance, and quiet strategy had culminated in a moment that no one could dispute. For the first time, I felt not just vindicated but untouchable. Backstage, the world felt smaller, quieter, yet more electric than the gala floor. The hum of conversation and clinking glasses faded behind the heavy curtains, replaced by the rapid pulse of my own heartbeat. I was catching my breath, letting the adrenaline and satisfaction settle into something steady and measured. Then I felt a presence, my father. His face pale, eyes wide, a mix of pride, disbelief, and something heavier I couldn't quite name. "You could have told us," he muttered, his voice low, almost strangled with emotion. His hands trembled slightly, gripping the railing as if he needed support. It wasn't a reprimand nor a question. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the years he had missed, the efforts he had ignored, and the truth he was only now forced to face. I looked at him calmly, letting my silence speak before words formed. "You wouldn't have believed me," I said softly, without accusation. The words weren't sharp. They were measured, factual. I didn't need to convince him. The recognition from the room outside was evidence enough. My sister appeared then, her face tight with tension. She tried to reclaim some semblance of control, smoothing her dress and gesturing vaguely to me. I helped with the idea," she said, her voice forced, rehearsed. Her eyes flicked between me and our father, searching for an ally, for justification, for a lifeline that simply didn't exist. I turned to her, and for a moment, the air seemed to condense between us. My gaze was steady, unwavering. "You were too busy taking credit," I said. The simplicity of the statement struck harder than any shouting match could. No yelling, no tears, no theatrical anger, just the truth laid bare, quiet but undeniable. My father's hand dropped to his side, his mouth opening and closing as if words might arrive but refused. I felt a strange pity, not for him, but for the illusions he had clung to for decades. Illusions that had kept me invisible. My efforts unrecognized. From the distance, flashes of cameras began to punctuate the tense silence. Reporters had swarmed backstage, drawn by the announcement and the apparent drama unfolding in real time. The chaos was poetic in its timing. The very family that had overlooked and dismissed me was now confronted with the consequences of their blindness before the world. My sister stiffened, realizing that the narrative she had built around herself, of self-made success and unchallenged dominance, was unraveling publicly. My father, still stunned, placed a hand on her shoulder, perhaps to shield her, perhaps to steady himself. But it was too late. I stepped back slightly, letting them have the stage, letting the murmurs and flashes carry the story they had refused to see in private. For once, the recognition I had earned was public, unavoidable, and entirely beyond anyone's control. The whispers around me confirmed it. My efforts, my strategy, my years of quiet sacrifice were now on display, irrefutable, validated by the world's eyes, not theirs. And in that moment I realized how liberating truth could feel when delivered on your own terms. The gala lights reflected off the polished floor, the crowd's attention palpable, and I understood the depth of what had unfolded. Justice had arrived not through confrontation or pleading, but through calm, deliberate revelation. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue. The story was already being told, and for the first time, it was mine. A few days after the gala, my phone rang. Seeing my father's name on the screen made my chest tighten, not with fear or anger, but with the calm awareness that the conversation ahead would finally be different. I answered, letting the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. "Hello, Dad." His voice was softer than I had ever heard it, tinged with defeat and an unfamiliar humility. I just wanted to say, maybe I was wrong. I may have been unfair to you all these years." There was a pause, as if he were gathering courage to continue, and I listened carefully, noting the shift in tone. The honesty that had been absent for decades. I didn't interrupt. I let him speak, letting the words settle into the quiet space between us. And when he fell silent, searching for approval or absolution, I spoke, calm, steady, deliberate. "You taught me one thing, Dad," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Work quietly until the results make noise." There was a long pause on the other end. I imagined him leaning back in his chair, realizing that the daughter he had dismissed for so long had not only survived, but thrived. I could almost see the weight lifting from his shoulders, the recognition of the truth finally piercing through years of denial. "I forgive you," I added, choosing my words with care. "But I have to set a boundary. I'll always be your daughter, Dad, but I won't be your disappointment anymore." He swallowed audibly, the kind of sound that carries both regret and relief. I understand. I'm proud of you," he whispered, his words hesitant, as if practicing honesty felt strange on his tongue. I smiled softly, though he couldn't see it. I didn't need an apology to feel vindicated. I didn't need his pride to validate my worth. I had learned that recognition comes not from those who overlook you, but from the work, the persistence, and the integrity you carry into every day. We ended the call with a quiet understanding. Not perfect, not fully reconciled, but honest. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about acknowledging it and moving forward. I had finally claimed my power, my voice, and my place in the world without needing permission or validation. And for the first time, I felt free. Weeks later, I found myself back in the house I had once called home, though it no longer felt like mine. My footsteps were light, almost hesitant, as I wandered through the quiet hallways. The room I had grown up in had been repurposed as a guest room. Familiar yet strange, it carried echoes of laughter I barely remembered, and shadows of silence I had endured. I paused at the doorway, taking in the pale walls, the neatly made bed, and the shelf lined with books and trinkets. A small universe of memories I had once inhabited but never owned. On the shelf, a framed photo caught my eye. It was from years ago. My sister and me, awkward smiles frozen in time, a reminder of the days when recognition had been so unevenly distributed. My fingers traced the edges of the frame, and a quiet surge of reflection rose within me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a new frame, one that held a picture from the gala. There I stood, radiant, poised, smiling in a way that carried the weight of years spent unseen, unacknowledged, yet undefeated. I set the new photo beside the old one, letting the images coexist. One represented the girl who had endured, who had bent under the pressure of neglect and favoritism. The other represented the woman who had risen, silently, patiently, deliberately. It was not a story of revenge. It was something subtler, deeper. A story of self-realization and quiet empowerment. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I allowed myself to reflect. For years, I had thought I wanted my father's approval, craved the validation of my family, and measured my worth against their perception. But standing in this room, surrounded by the relics of a childhood that had tried to define me, I realized the truth. I had needed only my own. My labor, my patience, my strategic silence had carried me here. I had transformed invisibility into power, neglect into fuel, and doubt into determination. I ran my fingers along the shelf, lining the two photos side by side. The past and the present coexisted quietly, a subtle contrast that spoke more eloquently than words ever could. I whispered to myself, not for anyone else to hear, but because it felt necessary to claim the moment fully. For years, I thought I wanted his approval. Turns out, I only needed my own. The light from the window cast a soft glow across the room, illuminating the frames, the memories, and the quiet sense of triumph that settled over me. There was no gloating, no dramatic gestures. The ultimate power was not in making them see, not in proving anything to anyone, but in recognizing my own worth, my own resilience, and my own authority over my life. I stood, glanced once more at the shelf, and walked out, leaving the room behind not with anger or bitterness, but with peace. The house, the family, the years of struggle, all were part of my story, but none dictated my future. The true victory was quiet, internal, and unassailable. I had grown, endured, and emerged fully realized. And as I closed the door, I felt the ultimate freedom. The freedom to exist on my own terms, validated by no one but myself. A year later, I stood in the grand hall of my company's flagship event, the buzz of conversation and the soft hum of music filling the space. The room was alive with recognition for the work I had poured my heart into. Every project a testament to years of quiet dedication and resilience. From across the crowd, I spotted my father, standing slightly apart, hands folded, observing with a quiet pride I had never seen in him before. He didn't approach immediately, as if he needed to absorb the moment on his own terms, humbled by the realization of what I had built. My sister lingered near the periphery, her posture more reserved, eyes thoughtful. I knew she was reevaluating the choices she had made. The relentless chase for approval, the misplaced confidence, the need to claim credit for what wasn't hers. It wasn't vengeance I felt. It was understanding, a recognition that the story had changed and that each of us would walk away differently. I raised a glass, glancing briefly at the framed photos from the gala tucked into my office, and whispered softly to myself, "Forgiveness doesn't erase history. It just ends its power over you." The words carried a calm finality,